I've said it all along that the beauty of our profession as project managers is our willingness to share our experiences. Our stories come freely and we accept them with an open mind because, as we all know, every project is different, every project manager is different, and the way we get to the resolution is different, which is why these stories become so helpful to the foundation and building blocks we use to get better at and practice our craft. This week, I have the pleasure of welcoming Kevin Torf, author of Getting the Job Done, Practical Advice and Real-World Anecdotes to Manage Successful Projects, to the Everyday PM podcast, to share with us his advice and anecdotes in a structured yet very personable manner. Check it out. Welcome to the Everyday PM podcast, the podcast where we discuss project management principles for your everyday life. My name is Campea, and I'm a certified project/program manager with a decade of experience working for healthcare, retail, consumer goods, and tech industries. I am so excited to welcome Kevin Torf, author of Getting the Job Done, Practical Advice and Real-World Anecdotes to Manage Successful Projects, and an information systems executive with a career spanning more than 40 years. He is also the co-founder and managing partner of T2 Group, and I am very excited to have some of his time today. Kevin, welcome to the podcast.
Well, Anne, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to your audience, and really excited about having this interview, and looking forward to answering some of your questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm getting ready to kind of dig into some of the details of the book, but I see that you are in Southern California right now, sunny Southern California right now. Are you actually in the middle of your workday there at T2 Group?
I am. We still have actual traditional offices. I know that might be unique for some people that over the last year through the pandemic, but we do have an office facility, and we do still try practice coming into the office in a safe way where appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, I'm in Torrance at the moment. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic. Well, again, I really appreciate you joining me on the podcast. I wanted to start with the book itself, right? Because the book has released. So congratulations for that. It released, I believe, on September 7th. So everyone make sure to get the book. We're going to dig into kind of the details of that today, and I'll make sure that the links to grab the book, whether it's in the e-format or in the hard copy, are available within this post as well. So Kevin, let's start with the beginning first, right? You write this enlightening conclusion. And I really want to bring that to the top of this podcast because it really hit me. It really struck me as something that I could correlate with. And I think a lot of the people who read this book will also be able to correlate with. And you find this yourself kind of at the end of the book, where Kevin kind of does a recap of the entire book. And it's called, the last chapter, or the conclusion is called Life is a Project, which fits, I think, so very well with the driving force behind what the Everyday PM is about, which is we're project managers, either by title or by nature, and the things we do in our work can apply to our everyday lives. And I love this kind of a roll-up of at the end of your book, Kevin, because it talks about how life is essentially a project. And a lot of the things that you're undertaking to complete a project have a lot of things in common with what we do in our everyday lives. So can you talk a little bit about kind of that summary of overall?
I do. I try to practice what I preach. Not always, as we always, have different ideas of the way we do things. But I love business, and I love equating the work I do. And I try to find metaphors and things to help me understand it better. So, I talk about playing chess. I talk about these are moves that you make that have consequences, because after you've made the move, you have to deal with the consequence that occurs. Right. In running a project and running your business, it's the same impact. Other things I didn't put in the book, but, a large ship, when you want to sail the ship or turn the ship, you need to start steering the ship well before the ship actually turns. Well,
Sure.
that's all about anticipation. That's all about preparation. You can't just go from one place to another place really quickly. So these are things that help me better understand project management, better understand the business side of doing things. And it gives me that relationship.
Yeah, I agree. I love this quote from the book. If it's okay, I'm going to quote the book. It's, you say, if you were dropped in the middle of the ocean and were unable to tell where land was, what direction would you swim? I love that question. It just makes you think about what is the appropriate answer to that. And you go into talk about, what the answer should be to that, or what you think the answer should be for project managers. But can you talk a little bit about how that metaphor kind of applies to how you
You
navigate
know,
as a project manager?
they're different type of people, and people do think differently, and it doesn't necessarily make one way right or wrong. With my success, it has really come about because I have engaged and I have got the job done. And in order for me to do that, I believe you just need to start sometimes, even without knowing where you're heading or the direction you're going. I
Yeah.
know this can be totally counter intuitive to planning, which is all about project management, but you got to start at some point. I find in my work and the work that I do with other people, that period of starting can really be a tough time for people to engage. And people like to think through every possible scenario, or they will struggle to find where to start, where the beginning should be. And what I was trying to express in that statement was, it's actually not important. What is important is you do start. And then once you've started, you can reevaluate where you are and then make the adjustments you need. Now, it's always good to do the right thing the first time. It's not, someone would argue that, that you might make mistakes. Isn't that going to be repetitive? No, I don't find it. It is. I find it will still be, it's a more productive way of doing something.
Yeah. I think a lot of project managers, old project managers who have been in the field for a very long time, even to this day, probably still have that anxiety of just diving in and swimming, right? No matter whether you have the direction to land or not. And I just like that metaphor, because it really speaks to the fact that we can plan and plan and plan as project managers. And obviously we want to plan as much as possible, but there are just simply some things that come up in a project that we'll never be able to anticipate. And the fact of the matter is, at some point you really just have to start swimming. And I thought that was just such a beautiful line from the book. But I wanted to dig into the acronym that you use for projects, because I typically use acronyms when I'm studying for courses and exams, because they make things easier to remember, right? And so the book itself, you use projects, but it's actually an acronym. Can you talk a little bit about what each of the letters represents, and was it your intent to use an acronym for the title?
Well, just as we talked about getting in the ocean and swimming, I didn't have a plan. I didn't start with the word projects. What happened was, I started writing out tips, and my first objective of this book was to really just make each page a tip on itself that could be read by itself without having a tie all together and in a theme. And I just accumulated a lot of these tips over time. And when we started looking at this could possibly be a book, I started thinking about, well, how would I group these different tips into different categories? And, as we were coming up with different terms, it really did just come about coincidentally that I started saying, well, hold on, some of these might work. And this is all about project management, and P for planning, R for retrospective, S for standards. And then we juggled a few words around, and it played really well into my hand, which is very much, swim and change your course and change your direction. And we ultimately got to where we wanted to go, I believe.
I'll pretend that you had that foresight, from the beginning, because I do think it's so brilliant to have the acronym available. And for those who have studied for the PMP exam, for example, that's one of the main things you remember is the acronym, to remember all the body of knowledge areas, right? So this is just another great way to represent what each of these sections of your book mean. And then I am just thoroughly impressed with how each section is outlined. As an instructor, I think this book can easily be used by instructors to teach project management to their students, just in the way that it's structured, because you have very practical experiences that you share. And then you kind of tie it in with project management overall, and kind of what does this mean for this particular section of the book. And really the practicality of it is really what I love, and the anecdotes obviously as well. The book contains several of them, right? Several anecdotes on kind of wide-ranging topics. I think I'll let you highlight kind of some of your favorites that you've included in there. But was it important for you in your writing process to make sure that you made it practical and entertaining and informative, all of those things?
No, it was. That was my intent. The word projects might not have been, but definitely I didn't want to write a book that was a hard book to read. I'm not a very good reader naturally. So I like picture books still today. But I do read a lot, and I've just always struggled with reading. It's never been natural to me. And because I'm studying all the time and learning academic books, I just find them, hard to, remember, and to, get into the detail of what the intent of what the author is trying to communicate. So I felt that a way to do this and make a little bit more fun of it was to bring these times in history that people would think, oh, I didn't even know that. Oh, that was a big moment. Oh, the Big Dipper in Boston, that's what really happened. Those tunnels collapsed. Oh, the Mars lunar landing didn't work out because two people didn't talk between each other, and there were a couple of decimal points out on their measurements. So those things they're great times in history to remember different times things occurred, but then to try to relate them to maybe what we would have done differently now with hindsight. With hindsight, everything's a lot easier, and how we can implement different methodologies and different approaches that could help facilitate a lot of these things. We spoke about getting started. Leonardo da Vinci was the most famous person for starting hundreds and hundreds of projects, and yet he actually took very few to fruition. And a lot of people are like that naturally, where they want to start something and they think they can do it better in a different way. So they start it again, and then they start it again, but they never get to the finish line. So again, great. I found it a very interesting way of trying to tell the story and bring a little bit of humor to it, to make it a little bit less of a heavy read.
Yeah, I agree. It's just anyone who picks this up, whether you're new to project management or just interested in the field, it's very entertaining because of the fact that you're able to correlate stories that we've heard about or maybe knew a little bit about, but you're able to make that correlation, which is fantastic. And then the tips, right? The tips that everyone can take away. Again, whether you're titled project manager or not, there's a lot of practical use coming out of this book that I think a lot of us can take with us. And that's really what's important, especially as learners and as students, is tell me what I can do even after I'm out of this classroom, right? And what can I infuse into what I'm doing at work? And I think that's what sets your book apart from the other project management, guidance related, tip related books, is that the level of practicality and the entertainment value that's tied along with it make it for a very, very interesting read. And that's just my sincere review of the book. But I wanted to dig into the value of collaboration and consensus, because I know with project management and the way that the actual role itself is expanding and the industry is expanding, right? I think it's expected to grow 30-something% in the next few years. Is you have to be very dynamic in the way that you project manage. And so it's not so much technical as it is now having that emotional intelligence and learning to work with people. And so I bring this up in terms of the collaboration and consensus, because I feel like that is a trait that is becoming more and more important for a project manager to be able to inhibit. So how do you know when it's time to kind of, when you're working with your stakeholders, because this happens to all of us, right? You bring the stakeholders into a room, your goal is to align them. They debate for an hour and you walk out and you have nothing. And so it's really about, how do you make sure that you're driving the collaboration, but you're also driving the consensus? And how do you stop the debate and settle on a compromise with these stakeholders?
So the last resort, and I think I even use those words, is having to dictate and make a decision when you have to. And there are times when that does have to happen. So the question really is not that you shouldn't do that. If you have to, you have to. But how do you avoid forcing other people to do something that you want, or telling people they have to, or dictating, as I call it? To me, you've got to set up an environment where they want to collaborate, not forcing them to collaborate. I talk about the push-pull theory in project management, where you dictate to people what to do and hope that they're going to do it. Well, you're not going to get the buy-in people want, versus if you ask them what you think they should be doing. So if you said to me, this is my objective, how would you go about it, Anne? And you told me, well, I would do it this way. Well, now you've actually made an investment in the contribution that you're making. This automatically makes you a little bit more accountable. And because you're a little bit more accountable, it's probable, not always, but it's probable, you will now want to, deliver and fulfill what you've been asked, because it wasn't someone that told you had to do it. It was someone that asked your opinion and you gave it. And the more you can do that within a team atmosphere where people can share thoughts and ideas between each other and collaborate, you're really not managing. The word project management, the word management really doesn't even play in here. It's about leadership. It's about being a coach. I do like my metaphors. So I talk about the Leicester football team in England. There was, a team that only had a tenth of the capital of some of the leading teams like Manchester United and Manchester City, but yet they won the Premier League, one of the most sought after trophies in the world. And people would say it was never possible. They didn't do it with having superstars on their team. They did it with good communication. They did it by trusting people. They did it by allowing people to do their job. And they did it in such a manner that the entire force of the team was greater than the individual count. And, we always like to use the word, does 1 and 1 equal 3? Well, if you're able to really collaborate, you can. So a long answer, but if you do this well, in my opinion, you don't have to make that tough decision then at the very end. Now, if you have to, you still have to, because you've got to get the job done. And if it's your responsibility and you're accountable, then you need to do it. But I look at every time you do that as actually a failure, that you didn't build an environment that would allow those decisions to be made by the team and to be totally self-sufficient and empowered to do that.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, that some people kind of don't look beyond the fact that, oh, I didn't drive this decision, or, I wasn't aggressive enough to make sure that, the decision that I wanted to get out of it was made. But I like the fact that you're telling us to take a step back. Do you even have the culture or kind of the environment built to be able to get your stakeholders to feel comfortable making those decisions and coming to that consensus? That's brilliant. I love that. And there's a lot of that in your book too, I would say. A lot of this type of thing where it's asking us to kind of take a step back as project managers, get out of the weeds for a second, really just kind of look at what you've built and that type of thing. So I like that perspective.
I will say, just to add, it's something you have to practice like anything in life. It's not natural to some people. And it actually, I don't know if I think I wrote this. I'm trying to remember some of the things I wrote, but it wasn't, to me, when I started in my career, I started off by being in control of everything I did. I started by telling people what I wanted them to do.
Mhm.
Even told people how to go about doing what I wanted them to do. And I was successful. I've been very fortunate in life. I built a few companies on that model, but it doesn't sustain very well. And, we talk about burnout. We talk about people being invested. And it took me a long time to realize I was losing good people because I wasn't allowing them to grow. So I was actually the reason that they weren't getting better in their job because I never gave them the opportunity. If I kept
Right.
telling them what to do all the time, they did it. We got the job done, but it can be far more valuable to have them want to do it and be part of that. So it's a tough lesson to learn. And, I still today, I struggle with reminding myself, even when I look at the book and I read some of those tips, I say to myself, you should practice some of what you write.
Yeah. Aren't we all are always our own self-critics though? And I agree. It's so hard. We have so much kind of that we need to keep in our skill set. And it's often forgotten some of the things that you were practicing up front that many years later, oh, I did that before. Maybe I should try that again. And so I don't blame you, Kevin. I think it's there. Just so there's a lot to remember. I wanted to actually ask you about your experience working with T2 Group, because I imagine it's your culminative experience through your 40-year career that led you to this moment of, hey, I would like to write this book and have it, share my knowledge and my experiences with others. Can you talk a little bit about T2 Group and the projects that you worked on there? And was there a particular project that you kind of learned a lot out of that you can share with us?
So I've been very fortunate. There are a lot of people that have put a lot of trust in the T2 Group and companies and have given me the opportunity to learn even at their cost. So I got to thank all my clients because they were very instrumental in me doing what I do today and how I go about doing that. I've had a very varied career, but it's mostly been in technology. And about some 15 years ago, one of my customers came to me and said, would I help them with a project for a hospital? And back then, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I'd done project work before and in different capacities throughout my career. And I said, yeah, I'd love to. And this was actually building a new hospital where pretty much from the ground up, every IT decision that had to be decided needed to be made and
Amazing.
costed. So the project was very daunting. It was very large. And one of, I do believe maybe a talent, I don't know if it is a talent or something I've practiced, is I can simplify complex situations. And it was more about, well, there's 200 projects, but each project is just one single one. So don't think of all 200, think of just one project at a time. And, nothing in life is that linear, but if you can break it down in such a manner, you can really get things done. And I was fortunate enough to be part of this project, and it was the Anderson Pavilion for Children's Hospital, which is a great hospital. It's one of the top hospitals in the country, and I was fortunate to work with great people. And we really went about, this 3 years, some 3.5 year engagement. And today it's probably still one of the top hospitals in the country from 15 years ago. So that was one that really comes to mind, because it was also the start of my career in healthcare, which I've really loved. And I've really loved working with hospitals and helping hospitals achieve their major goals. Fortunate enough to do a project with Sharp Healthcare, which is another very well managed, very organized hospital system. And working with a lot of smart people, smarter than me, it brought me a whole new insight about how to better collaborate. And one of the challenges Sharp had, which is no different from some of the other hospitals, is in the IT side, you have the application team and you have the infrastructure team, and they don't always work as well together as what one would want or one would hope. And that was the T2 group's responsibility, was to bring that chemistry to get these teams to come together in order for them to relocate the entire data centers. And very exciting to work with just some 400 people and coordinate the activities. And obviously I had a great team that did it. I didn't do it single-handedly, but these are projects that T2 Group has been proud of, and there's many of them.
Amazing. It sounds like your superpower, you know, taking these big, complex projects, multi-million, billion, whatever budget it is, and making it consumable by your team to be able to kind of chip away at getting to that end result. I think that's amazing. And I imagine that those experiences are really what fed into the anecdotes and the lessons learned that you're sharing in the book as well.
No, they're very rewarding. And it's the people that, as I said, that I've worked with, and the team that I've built have really contributed to a lot of the success, and we are very, very proud of it.
That's great. And so, Kevin, you've written a book. Your career is spanning 40 years, 40 plus years. You've got an amazing team, amazing experiences on projects. Is there another book in the horizon? What do you feel? What's next, Kevin?
Well, you know, one of my struggles is I am a little anal with everything I do, and I'm very attentive to a lot of detail. And this book was a struggle for me because I was never happy. And the book took a little longer than I'd intended because I kept rewriting it. And even when I did the final proof of the book, I thought, oh, I could say things in a little bit of a different way, and I could change this. So like I told you from the beginning, I had to use, take some of my own advice and say, it's a start, get it out there, get feedback. And yeah, I do believe there'd be a version 2 because I saw so many things I could improve and I would want to. So this was a life challenge for me not doing that, because otherwise the book would have never got out. And now I have the opportunity to get feedback from people, get advice from people, and really now bring that into maybe another version. So I'm not going to do it immediately because I need a little bit of a break because it was a lot of work. But I definitely do have plans eventually for version 2.
That's fantastic. The book itself was a project, it sounds like, and now you're in the middle of postmortem and understanding, what you can iterate on. So that's fantastic. I'm looking forward to, if you have future editions of it, or even people typically they kind of go back in and tweak the original version. But either way, Kevin, I think it's a great book. I really hope that project managers and non-project managers will pick it up. I think there's a lot of good life lessons in there too. So whether you're a project manager or not, please do yourself a favor, pick up the book. It's out today, or as of yesterday, I think, of doing this interview. Getting the Job Done: Practical Advice and Real-World Anecdotes to Manage Successful Projects. And I would put in parentheses to that title, at work and in your everyday life, because again, I think there's a lot of practical takeaways there. So Kevin, is there anything else that you wanted to impart on our audience, words of wisdom or anything to
I've really enjoyed this interview. Thank you for even inviting me to be part of your group that you've created. I really ask everybody out there to read it with the intention that these ideas and thoughts might help you. And I would love to know if they do. I would love to know if they don't. Again, I think there's always different ways to interpret something. There's different ways that people will understand what I've written, even though my intent might have been different. And I'd love that feedback, because that's how we do evolve. And the most important chapter, I don't call it postmortems, it's called reflection for a reason, because it's not good, it's not bad. It's just understanding what you could have done differently if you did do it differently, or you did do it again. And I love that. I love that part of refining what I do myself in my personal life with my children, and especially with your audience. So it's very, very important to get that feedback, and I do hope that people will provide it.
Well, thank you, Kevin. And that will do it for you and I in this installment of the Everyday PM podcast. As a reminder, the book is available everywhere in paperback as well as ebook now. And I believe there's an audiobook coming as well. Is that right, Kevin?
There is an audiobook. There's some hardcover books as well. So
Fantastic.
we're very fortunate. The Ink magazine, Ink Original, picked the book up as well. So they are promoting it. So we've been very fortunate with the reception we've already received, and it's still in its early stages. So again, I was never intended to be the best author. I just wanted to really share some of my thoughts.
And I think that's what is going to resonate with its readers for sure, because it definitely did resonate with me, Kevin. So if folks want to continue the conversation with you, provide some feedback on the book, or just talk about project management, where can they find you online?
No, they can. I've got my LinkedIn homepage up, and they're absolutely welcome to send me messages and communicate through LinkedIn, and I'll make myself available. I'm relatively good at it. It takes me a little bit of time to get back to people, but I generally will respond.
Fantastic. Well, you can also find me on LinkedIn as well. And we ask that you also support the Everyday PM podcast by giving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcasting platform you are listening in on. We also have the video version of this available on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Campea. And like I said, that will do it for Kevin and I in this installment of the Everyday PM podcast. Thank you all so much for joining us. And until next time, take care.